topic may not be relevant for some of you, but I had decided last night that I was going to speak about this subject. So I'm going to try to walk you through something about Abdu'l-Bahá that you probably already know. So this may be something that I'm repeating for you, but nevertheless, this is what I was prepared to do at the last minute, so this is what I put together, okay? For those of you that don't know, Abdu'l-Bahá was the oldest son of Baha'u'lláh, the prophet founder of the Bahá'í Faith, and after the passing of Baha'u'lláh in 1892, Abdu'l-Bahá became the head of the Bahá'í Faith from 1892 all the way to his passing in 1921. In that time, during the last years of his ministry, he traveled to the West. He came to America in 1912 and he spent nine and a half months here. And he traveled to Europe, to Germany, to England, etc. And by the way, if you're interested, that's a very nice picture, portrait of Abdu'l-Bahá up there. Okay? Before I do this, I want to tell you about 4 documents. Shoghi Effendi describes them as the charter of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. What is a charter? Charter is a founding document. These are the 4 documents on which the world order of Baha'u'lláh is based. The Kitab Aqdas, as you know, Baha'u'llah's most holy book, the Kitab Aqdas, gives us several institutions. It gives us the Universal House of Justice, and it gives us the local spiritual assembly. So far I'm okay. If you're lost, raise your hand, make a comment, say something. Kitab Aqdas provides us with 2 institutions, the Universal House of Justice and the local House of Justice. Go to the next one. The Tablets of the Divine Plan is also called the Charter of the World Order of Baha'u'lláh, and I will talk a little bit about this later. The most important document that I want to talk to you about here today is the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. The Universal House of Justice and the local spiritual assembly is given to us in the Aqdas. In the middle, Abdu'l-Bahá in his Will and Testament tells us that to elect the Universal House of Justice, we must first elect the secondary House of Justice, which we now call the National Spiritual Assemblies. He tells us we should elect the National Spiritual Assembly by first electing delegates who will get together once a year at the convention. And these delegates will elect the National Assembly. And the National Assemblies every 5 years will elect the Universal House of Justice. So the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Bahá gives us the institution in the middle, the secondary House of Justice or the National Spiritual Assembly. It tells us how we will elect the National Spiritual Assembly, and then it tells us how we will elect the Universal House of Justice. That's why these documents, the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Bahá is the charter of the world order of Baha'u'lláh, because it lays out the administrative order. The one document I skipped over is called, Shoghi Effendi calls it part of the charter of the world order of Baha'u'lláh, is the Tablet of Carmel. The Tablet of Carmel that Baha'u'lláh revealed to us, in which he lays out, Shoghi Effendi tells us, the institutions that will be built on Mount Carmel. It lays out the building of the House of Justice and all the other buildings. So those 4 documents form the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Bahá, the Tablets of the Divine Plan, in which he told us to go around the world and bring the Baha'i Faith to the whole world, the Tablet of Carmel, which Baha'u'lláh gave us, and the Kitab Aqdas. So 2 documents from Baha'u'lláh and 2 documents from Abdu'l-Bahá together constitute the charter of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. Have I confused everybody? They are the founding documents of the world order of Baha'u'lláh, these 4 documents. The world order of Baha'u'lláh, the administrative order of Baha'u'lláh, the buildings on Mount Carmel, all those are based on these 4 documents. These tell us what these institutions will be. Okay? Go. Next. Did you skip one? No. Okay, go. Did you skip one? Oh. Okay. Abdu'l-Bahá, towards the end of his life, describes his most important achievements. He's not bragging. He's not saying, I'm so good, I did this. But in all his achievements that he did, he places a great deal of importance on these 3 things that he achieved. One of them was laying to rest the remains of the Bab on Mount Carmel. Why? Why is laying to rest the... Okay, that's good. These things have a mind of their own. Just to very quickly give you some history about the Bab. As you know, the Bab was martyred in 1850 in Tabriz. After he was martyred, his mortal remains, along with the remains of his companion, Muhammad Ali Zunuzi, they were tossed outside the gates of Tabriz. And his body was hidden, moved from place to place, and finally, in 1899, while Abdu'l-Bahá was still living in Akka, the remains of the Bab were brought to Akka. Everybody okay with that so far? Remember that during the time from 1850 to 1899, those 60-some years that went by, first Bahá'u'lláh and then Abdu'l-Bahá were constantly aware where the remains of the Bab were. And in 1899, the conditions were such that Abdu'l-Bahá thought it was appropriate time to move the remains of the Bab from Iran to Akka. When the remains of the Bab were brought to Akka, Abdu'l-Bahá knew where the body would be laid to rest, because Baha'u'lláh had specifically instructed Abdu'l-Bahá where the body of the Bab would be laid to rest, and I'll talk about that in a minute. He had already started to purchase some land in Haifa, but there was not much he could actually do. There was nothing he could do. He was not a free man. It was in 1908, I think you guys remember the story. The Sultan of Turkey had sent a commission of inquiry. They were going to come to Akka, they were going to arrest Abdu'l-Bahá, and they were going to take him back to Constantinople, and he would be executed. All that time, 1907 to 1908, when Abdu'l-Bahá was telling all his relatives and everybody, all the Baha'is living in Haifa and Akka, to go somewhere else. 1908, somebody took a shot in Constantinople. Somebody tried to assassinate the Sultan. Well, when they hit him. They didn't kill him, but they hit the Sultan. When that happened, all heck broke loose in Constantinople, and this whole movement called the Young Turks rose up against the Sultan. The Sultan ordered all political prisoners and all religious prisoners to be free. That was one of the demands of the Young Turks. So 1908, for the first time, Abdu'l-Bahá was a free man. Until from 1852, when he had left Iran with his father and family, he had been an exile or a prisoner. It was not until 1908 that Abdu'l-Bahá walked out completely, totally free, able to do whatever he wanted to do. And the first thing he did was to lay to rest the remains of the Bab on the shrine that he had started to build. Nowruz, March 21st, 1909. Approximately 6 months after he became a free man, he laid to rest the remains of the Bab on Mount Carmel. Okay? Somebody read this for me. I always have trouble reading this one. Go ahead.
When all was finished, and the earthly remains of the martyr prophet of Shiraz were, at long last, safely deposited for their everlasting rest in the bosom of God's holy mountain, Abdu'l-Bahá, who had cast aside his turban, removed his shoes, and thrown off his cloak, bent low over the still open sarcophagus, his silver hair waving about his head, and his face transfigured and luminous, rested his forehead on the border of the wooden casket, and sobbing aloud, wept with such a weeping that all those who were present wept with him. That night he could not sleep, so overwhelmed was he with emotion. The most joyful tidings is this, he wrote later in a tablet, announcing to his followers the news of this glorious victory, that the holy, the luminous body of the Bab, after having for 60 years been transferred from place to place by reason of the ascendancy of the enemy and from fear of the malevolent, and having known neither rest nor tranquility, has, through the mercy of the Abha beauty, been ceremoniously deposited on the day of Nowruz within the sacred casket in the exalted shrine on Mount Carmel.
There's something very unique about this passage, friends. This is Shoghi Effendi's eyewitness account. Remember, he's writing God passes by. He's collecting information from everywhere to put in this book. This event, the laying to rest of the remains of the Bab on Mount Carmel, Shoghi Effendi was present there. And I was just in Haifa 2 months ago, and I double-checked and triple-checked with Mr. Rafati, the head of research in Haifa, and I said, your response to my letter, is this true that Shoghi Effendi was present? He said, yes, he was an Afnan. He was a relative of the Bab. He lived in Abdu'l-Bahā's house in Haifa. Yes, he was present there.
Do we know how old he was?
13. He was born in 1897. So add 1909, he was 12, 13 years old. So when Shoghi Effendi writes this, he's not writing that somebody told me something I read in a book somewhere. He actually witnessed this. He doesn't say it. He doesn't never announce that I was there when this happened, when the remains of the Bab were laid to rest. But he was there. Okay? Next. So I want to tell you why this was so important to Abdu'l-Bahá. He, as you know, Baha'u'lláh had traveled to Haifa several times. And in his last visit in 1891, he stood on a spot and he pointed to Abdu'l-Bahá, the exact spot where he wanted the shrine of the Bab to be built. And Abdu'l-Bahá had in 1909 finally fulfilled the desire of Baha'u'lláh to lay to rest the remains of the Bab at the spot that Baha'u'lláh himself had pointed out. So in laying to rest the Bab on Mount Carmel, Abdu'l-Bahá had fulfilled Baha'u'llah's explicit command. Yes?
I just have a curious question, and I know that Baha'u'lláh asked Abdu'l-Bahá to put the remain of the Bab in a certain place. My understanding that we, the Baha'i, not supposed to move the body from where they die. Like if I die in England, my kid's not gonna make me come over to Austin to bury me.
True.
I am just curious.
I don't have an answer for you. Baha'u'lláh wanted the body of the Bab moved. And I'll come to this in a minute. But this was Baha'u'llah's specific instruction.
And another question, were they hiding the Bab body from the enemies, I guess, somewhere, so they don't destroy it?
Initially, it was buried, moved from Tabriz to Tehran, where it was laid hidden in the shrine of Shah Azim in Tehran. From there, it was moved to the house of a Mr. Nur, And they moved it from place to place. And they hid it from place to place till they brought it to Akka. I know the chain. I know the chain of where they moved it, and I know some of the people in whose homes these things were hidden. So kind of, I'm sure Martha knows Mr. Noor too. Go for it. Next one.
I was gonna add something.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering what a sarcophagus was.
Oh, it's a outside enclosure.
Right, but it's made out of stone.
Yeah, it's made out of stone.
So it's a stone coffin.
Correct.
It's important.
Yeah. Go on to the next one. In the Tablet of Carmel, Baha'u'lláh simply describes the station, the highest station of Mount Carmel. It describes the fact that the administrative buildings of the Bahá'í Faith would be on Mount Carmel. But it starts, in the middle it says something quite amazing. You know, Baha'u'lláh wrote letters to all the kings and the rulers and the king of Iran. He wrote to Nasruddin Shah, and he wrote letters to all these different people. He wrote to Christians, he wrote to Muslims. There never seems to be anything that Baha'u'lláh wrote to the Jews. Is there? Baha'u'lláh didn't write anything to the Jews, did he?
Can you repeat it again, please?
Baha'u'lláh wrote letters to all the kings of Europe, most of the kings of Europe. He wrote letters to Nasruddin Shah and to the Sultan of Turkey. He wrote letters to Fouad Pasha and Ali Pasha, several ministers of the Turkish Sultan. But did he ever write anything to the Jews? Yeah.
I think I have the answer. All right.
Get it? Come on, let's
My
go.
understanding is even when we went to Haifa, they told us not to like recruit people to the Baha'i Faith because they want to keep peace with the Jewish people.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
In the Tablet of Carmel, he says, call out to Zion or Carmel. That's the direct call to the Jewish people. He's basically saying, come on over. I mean, that is it. Why is it not moving? This is what I wanted to show you. There's a reason I wanted to show you this. Remember in the Tablet of Carmel, he points out the ark and the building of the ark. The first marker, the first building on the ark is not seen in this picture, but you can see the ark, right? You can see the ark, it goes down like this. That's the last building you see here, that building. And if you keep going down the ark, that's the shrine of the Bahá'í. It is the first building on the ark. And this is not a perfect ark. It is not a perfect ark, but it is an ark. And you can go around like this and start looking at the buildings here. And here is the building that is the archives building. And right next to the archives building is the shrine of the Bahá'í. And that's what he calls for in the Tablet of Carmel. You guys lived in the Holy Land. You know all this, right? You do. Okay. And all I'm showing you is the archive buildings moving down to the shrine of the Bahá'í. Okay? Next. Ajit Giani describes all the buildings that would be built. Keep going. I have something I want to get to. This here is the shrine of Bahia Khanum, the sister of Abdu'l-Bahá. If you were an engineer and you were drawing an arc like this, you would have to have a middle point, center point. All you engineers understand what I'm talking about, right? You would have to have a middle point from which you would draw it. That's the middle point there. Chogyapinzi made the burial place of his aunt the center point of the campus. Go to the next one. Surrounding the resting place of the greatest holy leaf rank as foremost amongst the women, etc., which is what I just told you, that he made the point of that ark, the middle of that ark, the shrine of his great aunt. Go ahead. And again, the shrine of the Bahá'í was the first step in the building of the administrative order. Yes, sir.
Wasn't also when the body of the Bahá'í was brought to Akka, and before it was interred in the shrine, it was actually hidden under the bed of the greatest holy leader.
It was, absolutely. Go, next. So this is what I really wanted to get to. Why this is such a great accomplishment, what great Abdu'l-Bahá talks about the importance of what he had achieved in laying to rest. The Bible talks about the Jewish Bible in the last book that is published in the Christian version of the Jewish Bible. The Christians call it the Old Testament. The Jews refuse to call it the Old Testament. In the book of Malachi, it talks about the fact that in the last days, Elijah would come, followed by the Messiah, followed by the day of the Lord. So the Jews expected the coming of two messengers, as did the Christians. Because when they went to Jesus and said, why do they say the prophet Elijah should come? And Jesus in the book of Matthew says to the Jews that are asking him the question, if you will have it, John has already come. Basically, he's implying that John is Elijah. The Jews didn't accept that. The Jews are still waiting for the coming of Elijah. Now, the story of Elijah is an amazing story. Elijah fights against the evil people. He does all these things. And at the last minute of his life, he goes up into the sky in a flame of fire from top of Mount Carmel. So, the Baal returning to Mount Carmel was something that was prophesied that it would happen. And so, it is that when I was in Israel and I was living there, people would say to me, we're going to the Baha'i temple. And I would always say, yes, it is the Baha'i temple. It's the resting place of the prophet Elijah. We should know this. It is what the Jews were expecting. If Elijah and the promised Lord of hosts was to come, what would happen to the Jews? Was there anything supposed to happen at the time of the coming of these two great manifestations that they were waiting on? What was going to happen? Go to the next one. And it shall come to pass in the last day that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountain and shall be exalted above the hills. Just read this through for me, somebody. Come on, you read it.
And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.
Okay, next.
And I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God.
So, when the promises were fulfilled, the Messiah, the Elijah was returned, the Jews would finally be allowed to come back to Israel. And they would plant trees. They would turn the desert into a garden. And once they were there, nobody would be able to dislodge them again. This is the promise that the Jews had. When did the Bahá'í Faith begin? 1844. March 21st, 1844, the British government forced upon the Turks, Sultan of Turkey, a document called the Edict of Toleration. They had a very completely different reason for the Edict of Toleration. What was happening in Turkey, the Sultan's realm, which was not just Turkey, was all the way into Baghdad and all the way into Europe. The Christian missionaries were out there working very hard trying to convert people to Christianity. As soon as some Muslim became Christian, they would kill them. Because you had left Islam and had turned into Christian, therefore we could kill you. And that's what they were doing, and that's why this Edict of Toleration was such a document that said that the Ottoman Empire would no longer kill the minorities, and the minorities could live within the Ottoman realm wherever they wanted to. And it was after 1844 that the Jews were finally allowed to come back to what is now the Holy Land. Some of the land, they bought the land from the Arabs, but they came back and started to settle in the Holy Land after 1844. They came because this is at that point where the pogroms were going on in Europe, in Russia, in Poland, P-O-G-R-O-M-S, not programs, but pogroms. Under these pogroms, the Jews were being harassed and killed and beaten up, and all kinds of things were happening to the Jews, almost like what is happening to the Baha'is in Iran today. That's how the Jews were being treated. Okay, next. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. Next, go. I have to finish this. So when people say, what did the Holy Land look like? Here's what Mark Twain has to say about it. Read it.
A desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse, a desolation. We never saw a human being in the whole route, hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of the worthless soil, had almost deserted the country.
Mark Twain, Samuel Langhorne Clemens traveled throughout the Middle East, and this is his impression of Jerusalem and its environment. Go next. So here's what he's saying, and I'll show you some pictures of what it looked like. The wilderness and the parched land shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as a rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice. And And the excellency of Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of Lord, the excellency of our God. This is what Isaiah says, that when the promised one comes back, the desert shall blossom as the rose. Look, you read the next one.
And the parched land shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the habitation of jackals, herds shall lie down. It shall be an enclosure for reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, yea, fools, shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beasts go up thereon. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy and sorrow, and sighing shall flee away.
And the redeemed shall walk there. You know what the word redemption means? Christians have a different version of it. But in Jewish theology, redemption means freedom. The free people, finally, free people will be there and they shall walk there. This is a fulfillment of both Christian and Jewish prophecies. It is a fulfillment of prophecies given to both faiths. Go. I just want to show you pictures from the year 1900 approximately. This is Mount Carmel, by the way, in case you didn't know. Let's go through a couple of pictures. This is Jerusalem, Mount Carmel. This is what it looked like, guys. Go. Transportation was a little slow in those days. This, by the way, stop. This is, for those of you that have been there, you know this street goes all the way to the water. This is Ben Gurion Avenue. Okay.
And those are the Templar houses?
Those are all the Templar houses. By the way, this is a good point I should remind you, that the German Templars had come to live in Haifa and in Jerusalem around the year 1840 something. They had started to come here. They were there because they knew Christ was about to return and they were waiting there for the coming of Christ. In fact, Bahá'u'lláh went into the house of one of the Templars' homes that they had opened and he signed their guest book. He did. He did. So this Templar colony was there before the Baha'is got there. They were ready for the coming of Jesus. They knew the time was here. For those of you that grew up in Christian families, you know that this was a time when a guy named William Miller started to talk about the return of Christ in New York. This is when Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists and all these religions came up because they were ready for the coming of Christ. They knew the time was there. And then they kept saying, well, we missed it. He didn't show up. Whatever happened, God's will, it didn't come. But they were ready in 1844 because they had decided based on prophecies, based on their own internal understanding, that 1844 was the time for the return. They were 100% sure of that. Next. These are some really old pictures. You can keep running through them quickly. This is the port of Haifa. And it was a much larger port than the port of Akka. Akka doesn't hardly have any port. So when Baha'u'lláh arrived here from Adrianople in 1868, they got off here in Haifa and then they went with rowboats from Haifa to Akka.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does the stairs to the above shrine have any meaning, anything, or just because it was on a mountain, they have to do all those stairs?
No, Baha'u'lláh asked that those terraces be built. It's written into the Baha'i description of what the future world center would be like, that we would build the terraces.
No, I know they have to build stairs because it wasn't a mountain. They have to get it. But what I'm asking is, I don't know. I haven't read in anywhere like the number of the stairs, anything, any meaning, or just to reach there.
Just to reach there, I think.
I'm just curious.
No, I may be absolutely wrong. Let me just say I don't know the answer.
Okay. I'm just curious.
So when you talk about the desert shall blossom as the rose, I showed you the picture of the desert. I want to now show you the blossoming of the gardens. Keep going, a couple of pictures here. This is the shrine of the Bahá'í, who we believe is the return of Elijah. This is the burial place of Elijah. By the way, for those of you that don't know, there are two caves in there. The upper cave and the lower cave of Elijah. And Elijah is supposed to have lived in this cave. Martha and I were there one day in what I think was, if I remember correctly, was the upper cave of Elijah. And in the upper cave of Elijah, as you looked up, there was this picture of Jesus' mother, Mother Mary, up on a pedestal, quite high. And we're walking around in the cave, and all of a sudden, the statue starts to move. Really? The statue is moving? What's going on here? This is really a miracle. Well, it turns out, when I ask somebody, is the statue moved? They go, yeah, it moves, because this side is the Catholic side, and that side is the Syrian Christian side, or whatever. So at noon, or whatever time we were there, the statue was to rotate and face in the other direction. It scared me when I first saw the statue. I mean, it did. It's like, anyway, just, you know. Okay, so this is a sign of the person, the Bab, who we believe is the spiritual return of Elijah. That you should know. That you should. If you come across a person who is of Jewish descent, point this out to them. The greatest prophecy given to the Jews about the coming of the promised Messiah is that on that day they would finally be returned to their homeland. What the Jews call the diaspora. Remember, it was in the year 70 of the Christian calendar that Titus, the Roman Emperor Titus, came, and he became emperor later. Titus came in and sacked Jerusalem. He burned all Jerusalem down. He destroyed the Jewish temple and took all the Jews and said, get out of here, you can't come back. He scattered the Jews throughout the world and left the wall there. There was the only thing left, which is now the wall still stands, and the Jews still go there in front of the wall and pray. But that was all that was left of the Jewish people. They were never allowed to come back, because the Romans turned Christian. When Constantine became Christian, Romans turned Christian, and they followed the same formula that the Romans had followed: exclude the Jews from this area. And then the Muslims took it over, and they followed the same formula that the Christians and the Romans had followed. So the Jews were never allowed. There were some Jews around there, okay? There were Jews in Morocco. There were lots of Jews in Yemen. There were lots of Jews in Saudi Arabia even. But the Holy Land, they were excluded from until 1844, when they started to slowly come back to the Holy Land. Okay, next. I don't have much time left, so I'm going to try to rush through this thing. So, I want to point something out to you. Baha'u'lláh called his children Aqsan, Husn, the branches. Abdu'l-Bahá was the most mighty branch, Husn Azam. Is that correct? Husn Azam, right?
Aqsan is the branch.
No, but Abdu'l-Bahá was known as a Husn Azam. Husn Azam, others of Husn Akbar,
Isn't it the
etc.
holy branch?
The most mighty branch, most mighty branch.
Oh, most mighty branch.
So, the Jewish Bible, the Jewish call it the Tanakh, by the way, not the Old Testament. The Jewish Bible describes a person, and describes that person as the branch. And the Christian Bible describes a person as a branch in all capital letters. Go home, pull out your Bible, and look at this verse, Zechariah 3:8. Write it down and go check it. Your Bible also has the word branch in capital. That means it's talking about a person. And here's what it says. Let me go back. You understand who Joshua was. Joshua was Moses' general. He was the one that led the army into Canaan when the Jews came out of Egypt, according to the story. So he was the general. He was Moses actually never came to the Holy Land. As you know, he died before they crossed into the Holy Land. So Joshua is the person that led the army of the Jewish people into the Holy Land. Hear now, O Joshua the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for there are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. I will bring forth my servant. By the way, for those of you that are new, Abdu'l-Bahá, the word Abdu'l-Bahá means a servant of God, servant of Baha'u'lláh. So Baha'u'llah's oldest son took on the title of Abdu'l-Bahá. I am the servant of Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh called him the great branch, the most mighty branch. For behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. Nobody's writing down these Bible verses and chapter and verse so you can go home and check me? Okay.
Right now,
Yeah.
it does it.
Okay. And speak unto him, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, thus speaketh Baha'u'lláh, saying, Behold the man whose name is the branch, and he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Do you know why it was so important for Abdu'l-Bahá to ensure the building of the temple of the shrine of the Bahá'í? Here it is.
It's like for the Catholic Church.
Huh?
It's like for the Catholic Church, so important when Peter was told, you will build the temple in this stone. Yeah.
You're
It's the
Peter.
same meaning.
You're Peter, and on this I will build my church.
Yeah.
So said Jesus. And then go on. Read this next one. He's checking his messages. You read from me.
I'm checking this.
And even go ahead.
Even he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his throne. And he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both.
So understand what he's saying here, what the Bible is saying here. He shall bear the glory. So the glory of Baha'u'lláh will be on him, the man known as the branch. And he shall sit upon his throne. So he will be the prince to the king. He will be on the throne of Baha'u'lláh. He will be Baha'u'llah's successor. And the counsel of peace shall be between them both. Meaning these two, Baha'u'lláh and his son Abdu'l-Bahá, will be good friends. There will be a covenant, an agreement between them, that they shall get along. There could be children that perhaps didn't get along, but between the man known as the branch and the Lord of hosts, who we believe Baha'u'lláh is, there will be a covenant, will be an agreement, there will be peace between them. All right, read the last one.
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth.
So these, I frankly have often pointed these out to my Jewish friends. And as some of you know, a lot of my friends, in fact, the majority of my friends are Jewish. So I do point this out, absolutely point this out. So I'm going to tell you a story. When I first got on the board of directors of Interfaith Ministries, we had a new CEO, and he was Jewish, and he invited me to lunch and said, I don't know much about the Bahá'í Faith. Tell me about the Bahá'í Faith. So we sat down at lunch and we ordered a lunch. We were having Indian. And so he said, tell me about the Bahá'í Faith. I go, short version, long version, which one do you want? He goes, give me the short version. Because the short version is this, that the prophet Elijah and the Lord of hosts that you're expecting are here. And because they're here, you Jews have been allowed to come back to the Holy Land and build up the Holy Land, and you're protected. He looks at me like this, and he says, Ajit, I can accept that. I go, well, okay, let's have lunch. I mean, literally, that's what I said. The bottom line is this, dear friend. It is not my responsibility what you accept or don't accept. It is my responsibility to tell you what it is that we as Baha'is believe. And what we as Baha'is believe is clear-cut. We believe Baha'u'lláh is God's promised messenger to mankind for this day. That he brings the latest in guidance, the latest in teachings that mankind needs at this time. I have told the story before. You could be a Muslim, a Christian, you could be anything. And you could love His Holiness Jesus, you could love Muhammad, you could love Krishna and Buddha. That's perfectly all right to do. I do too. I love my mother greatly. She made me a jacket when I was 10 years old. I still love my mother, but the jacket doesn't fit. That's all we're saying to you. That Baha'u'lláh brings the teachings that are appropriate for this time. This does not mean that you fall out of love with Muhammad or Christ or anything. What we're really saying is, Jesus says Himself, I have many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. Howbeit, when the Spirit of truth is come, He shall lead you to all truth. Jesus Himself tells you that there will be the Spirit of truth come in the future. Christians run around saying they're waiting for the second coming of Jesus. Muslims run around saying they're waiting for the Mahdi and the Qaim and the Hussein or Mahdi and the Masih. Everybody runs around saying that. And then when you go up to them and say, hey, Baha'u'lláh and Bab are exactly what you were waiting for. And no, we're not interested. That's where we are. And this for me, for me, the most amazing story from Christianity is this. That Jesus walked up to this guy named Simon in the river Jordan and said, follow me, I'll make you fisher of men. And Simon got up and left to follow Jesus. That's the kind of challenge we face every day. When I tell you that Baha'u'lláh is the fulfillment of Christian prophecies, are you going to look at it or are you not? Because one of the principles that Baha'is espouse is the independent investigation of truth. You need to figure it out for yourself. Now you know. You never heard of the Bahá'í Faith? Now you have. Now you have to figure it out for yourself. Read the books. Understand. There's a lot of Baha'is here who know a lot. Ask them questions. They'll be happy to answer your question. Next one. Keep going. Keep going. So why was the shrine? I would just want to summarize why the shrine of the Bab was important. It fulfilled the wishes of Baha'u'lláh. It started the construction of the Ark. First building on the Ark is the shrine of the Bab. Started the establishment of the world center of the Baha'i Faith, fulfilled biblical prophecies, fulfilled the time of the return. Okay, next. These are 3 books if you're interested in learning more about Abdu'l-Bahá's life. These 3 books, Hassan Balyuzi's book on Abdu'l-Bahá is just wonderful. I mean, it just is a great book. The Child of the Covenant from Tahirzad is great. And then there's Stockman's book that's also wonderful to read. They describe much of the life and times of Abdu'l-Bahá, his day-to-day interaction with people, how he did, what he did, etc. Then there are books like 239 Days, Alan Watts' book, Promulgation of Universal Peace. There is Bada'iul Asar that Mirza Mahmud Zarqani wrote that notes all his, there's lots of books about Abdu'l-Bahá. But if you wanted to read the middle book, The Child of the Covenant or Abdu'l-Bahá by Hassan Balyuzi, are good starting points in English for you to look at. Can I thank you for staying awake for this whole thing? It's like sitting from nobody to say I am scheduled, I skipped over some of this because I'm scheduled to do 2 weeks on Haifa, visiting Haifa, and I'll show you all the buildings in greater detail and I'll talk about the historical importance of the buildings. So I'm scheduling that whenever Brian is supposed to put me in there. So, questions, comments, thoughts?
what you showed us, are they on YouTube or anything?
What?
What you showed us right now, what the whole presentation?
Give me a disc and I'll copy it for you. I don't know if they're on YouTube or not.
Oh, okay.
But if I could give you one message, if there is one thing I could tell you, it is this. With all my heart and soul, with every fiber of my being, I believe Baha'u'lláh and the teachings of Baha'u'lláh are what we need today. And the reason I say that, dear friends, that it is clear that all the old teachings that you have don't work. They just don't. Think about it. The oneness of mankind. Does any other religion teach the oneness of mankind? What do you think?
No.
No, because remember, Paul says, remember, brethren, we are all brethren in Christ. All Christians are brothers. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I don't know, Mr. Giani, did we talk about when we are talking about the Baha'i road is oneness of mankind, the principles that are going to help us to get to reach the unity or oneness of mankind, like equality between races and all the principles, the tools that are going to help us to
Absolutely.
reach that point.
Absolutely. She makes a very good point. Shaykh Effendi, in one of his writings, talks about the oneness of mankind as the pivot around which all principles revolve. So we believe in the equality of men and women because it brings us closer to the oneness of mankind. We believe in universal education because it brings us closer to the oneness of mankind. We believe science and religion are equal. Science and religion should agree. That brings us closer. So all these principles that Nuri Khanum is talking about are principles that bring us closer to the oneness of mankind, which is the most important principle in the Baha'i Faith. We spend all our time, all our energy trying to bring people closer together and trying to eliminate all forms of biases and prejudice, etc. That's the Baha'i Faith.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.